When it comes to media personalities and stories about the news and journalism, there are few that come bigger than Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And this past week, there have been developments. After nearly 7 years at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, Assange was dragged out of the building by British police in response to an extradition request from the United States. Assange stands charged with a conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. We will be speaking with a WikiLeaks editor, Kristinn Hrafnsson, in a few moments. But first, some detail on the charges and the timing of Julian Assange's arrest. This arrest was a long time coming. For years, Julian Assange said that Washington was building a case against him, working towards his extradition to the U.S. for publishing classified Defense Department documents on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Come on, fire!
And State Department documents and emails, the so-called diplomatic cables that exposed the ugly side of American foreign policy. This past week, Assange was proven right. However, the indictment released by the U.S. Department of Justice does not, as many predicted, charge Assange under the Espionage Act for publishing classified information. Such a prosecution would have opened the door to criminal investigations of other news organizations, including mainstream media outlets that published WikiLeaks' material. Instead, the DOJ has charged Assange under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, accusing him of proactively helping his source, Chelsea Manning, log into Defense Department computers to get the documents in question. Regardless of which law U.S. authorities are charging Assange under, press freedom advocates have warned that the criminalization of what Assange does stand accused of, such as the use of encrypted messaging, concealing a source's identity, and using secure drop boxes, all common reporting practices, could have precedent-setting implications for journalism in the U.S. and beyond. Let's start with the context and the question, why now? Given that Ecuador took Julian Assange in 7 years ago, does the decision to expel him from the embassy and probably place him at the mercy of the U.S. justice system simply come down to the fact that the president who initially gave him asylum, Rafael Correa, is no longer in power, having been replaced by the new president, Lenin Moreno?
That's exactly what happened. The only change that was in the scenario was the fact that there was a regime change in Ecuador, and the president came in that was willing to bow to the pressure or willing to curry favors with the Trump administration. There had been reports that he, in the New York Times in December, that he was willing to hand Julian Assange over to the Trump administration in exchange for debt relief or favors at the IMF. So it didn't come as a surprise, and therefore there has been increased pressure inside the Ecuadorian embassy in trying to force him out, and it ended in this manner this week.
Edward Snowden was among the people who tweeted on this right away, and he said images of Ecuador's ambassador inviting the UK's secret police into the embassy to drag a publisher of, like it or not, award-winning journalism out of the building are going to end up in the history books. Assange's critics may cheer, but this is a dark moment for press freedom. How do you see this precedent?
I totally agree with Snowden on this. It is a very dark day, and it sets up precedents that is totally very dangerous for journalists, editors, publishers all around the world. If you can extradite a journalist to a third country, to the United States, for publishing the truth, no journalist can be secure. So this must be stopped. This must be resisted in all manner. This has to unify journalists around this cause, whatever they may think about Julian Assange.
Prosecutors allege that in March of 2010, Julian Assange agreed to assist Chelsea Manning, his source, in cracking a password that would allow Manning to get access to some of those classified U.S. Defense Department documents that would later be released through WikiLeaks. Did that in fact happen, and how problematic will that be for Julian Assange's case?
Well, this communication, alleged communication between Julian and Chelsea Manning has been out in the open for years. There is a reference here to an alleged communication between a journalist and a source. And what is dragged forth there? There's a quote there that Julian Assange allegedly said to Chelsea Manning. Curious eyes never run dry. And that is supposed to be a proof of conspiracy. It's outrageous. Let's not forget the fact that Chelsea Manning was sentenced to 35 years in prison. She served 7 years of that time. She has now been hauled back into prison for refusing to testify against Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So this has been the escalation now. We have Chelsea Manning in prison. We also have Julian Assange in prison. So it's coming to a finale in the saga where a journalist, a publisher, and an editor is going to face prison time for doing what journalists are supposed to be doing.
The charges in the U.S. carry a maximum jail time of 5 years. First of all, do you take the U.S. Justice Department at its word on that?
No, I mean, there are two things to consider here. First, there's a reference to hacking here and being reported in the media as conspiracy or hacking, which is a very strange depiction of this. But secondly, this is only at the tip of the iceberg. We are absolutely certain that this is only one of the charges that will be brought on Julian Assange, and they will be added on more charges when he arrives, if he arrives in the United States in chains. It's specifically presented in this manner, in our opinion, to increase the likelihood that he will be extradited, because people will say, well, it's only 5 years.
So many news outlets published material furnished to them by WikiLeaks over your busiest period. There were the Afghan war logs, the Iraq war logs, the U.S. diplomatic cables. There was a feeding frenzy among mainstream media news organizations with that material. The New York Times, for instance, published WikiLeaks material, commodified it, turned it into clicks, profited from it, and published an editorial yesterday in which it kind of sat on the fence, whereas The Guardian in the UK said extraditing Assange is wrong. The New York Times sat on the fence and wrote a very carefully worded editorial on that. What do you make of the way news outlets have covered this story this week?
Well, they have been trying to play it very safe, and it seems to me that the New York Times, I read that editorial, seem to be content to fall on that plot to say, well, this is not charges for publication. This is not charges for journalism, but something totally different. They are falling into buying the narrative of the Trump administration, which I think is disgraceful. We all know what this is about. It's about the revelations of war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. That is what it's about. The Guardian changed its tune. We have been very critical of The Guardian, and we have to take them to court for a libelous and fabricated story they printed on November 27, which was a very dangerous one, the one on the allegation that Paul Manafort had somehow secretly had a meeting in the Ecuadorian embassy on 3 occasions, which is, everybody knows it's a total fabrication. They will not retract it.
Written by Luke Harding.
Written by Luke Harding and Dan Collins at the... and with the help of a third party from Ecuador, actually. So The Guardian changed the tone and came to the right conclusion on this issue.
Do you think Julian Assange can get a fair trial in the U.S.? Do you think he can get a fair extradition hearing in the U.K.? Which is more likely, in your view?
Well, if I would take into account the snarky comments by the judge last week about him being a narcissistic personality and what have you, which thought was totally outrageous.
So you don't have high hopes?
I do not have high hopes in the UK court system. As with trial in the United States, it's totally impossible to have a fair trial in the United States. If you consider the harsh words from high officials throughout the years and now from members of the Trump administration, there's no chance that he was going to have a fair trial there.
Jeremy Corbyn, the British opposition leader, has come out and said flat out that the extradition of Julian Assange to the U.S. for exposing evidence of atrocities in Iraq and Afghanistan should be opposed by the British government. Can UK politicians make a difference, or is it too late for that?
Of course they can make a difference, and we are really thankful for the support of politicians to this cause. And they have an effect on public opinion. They might even be in office when this comes to a finale in the courts here. Of course, they make a difference, just in the same manner that outrageous comments by politicians in the United States make it totally impossible for a fair trial there.
This case is about more than Julian Assange. It's about the precedent and the chill that it may set amongst other news organizations. I'm wondering how effective WikiLeaks can be with Julian Assange behind bars. You've been with the organization for 10 years. You're now an editor. Are you going to continue to publish information at the rate that you have been?
We have been, of course, restrained by this situation that Julian has been in for years. But we have tried to work around it, and we've had ways and means to do that. There have been weeks and months where Julian has been without any ability to communicate with the outside world, except through lawyers and a couple of colleagues that go in. So we are able to work around it, and WikiLeaks will continue its work.
Kristinn Hrafnsson, thank you very much for joining us here at the Listening Post today.
Thanks for having me.